We will be presenting the arrest data in New York City using historic and year-to-date data information. The questions we will be answering are there certain parts of New York City that are more prone to higher crime levels than others? How do crimes vary temporarily? How does the amount of crime in 2021 compare in 2006 to 2020? How do different boroughs compare with respect to crime? How do crimes committed vary by sex? And is crime more typical to certain age groups?
So some of the programs we used to analyze this data was Python to clean it and create output tables, as well as to do some clustering and running a logistic regression model. We also used Tableau to create maps and visualizations that allowed us to find trends in the data and present them. And finally, we used Excel to clean our outputs and create tables that are easier to read. So with regards to the databases we analyzed, we used two databases from the New York Police Department. One covered 2021 from January all the way to September, and the other one, the historic database, covered from 2006 all the way to 2020. And the database were composed of different records, which each represents an arrest by the New York Police Department. And it contains a unique arrest key, the arrest date, the police code, the offense code, as well as some demographic information with regards to the race, sex, and age of the perpetrator. And it also contains the location where the arrest happened, the exact geographical coordinates, as well as the precinct and the borough.
So for the supervised learning component of our project, we created a model using logistic regression that predicts the sex of a perpetrator given numerous variables like the type of crime committed, the location, the borough, the age of the perpetrator, etc. And our F1 score was 0.91. For the unsupervised learning component, we developed 5 clusters that split the perpetrators into various demographics. So within cluster 0, we have mostly exclusively non-Black individuals aged 25 to 44 typically. Within cluster 1, it was mixed in terms of race, but the bounds of age were a bit wider, being that most belong to this cluster were of age 25 to 64. Cluster 2 was almost all Black, and most were aged 25 to 44. Interestingly, cluster 3 was comprised only of females aged 65 and up. And cluster 4 was very similar to cluster 2, but there was more variation in terms of the boroughs. This is a heat map of arrests in New York City by borough. And you can see up top of Manhattan, that's where the crime activity is most concentrated, with other pockets of high crime areas scattered about the city.
So in terms of the total arrests made by each borough, 26 and 24% of the arrests were made in Brooklyn and Manhattan, making up almost half of the total arrests. And they were followed by Bronx and Queens, which did around 22% of the arrests. And Staten Island had the lowest number of arrests with only 4.7. So throughout time, as we can see in this graph, crime has been decreasing. The number of arrests compared to 2020 to 2010, it has decreased exponentially compared to the number of arrests there was last year with only 140,000. So historically, in terms of arrests by month, it has been 2021 has been following kind of the same trend as the average arrest per month historically. Even though it's significantly lower, the trend is pretty similar.
And in this bar graph, you can see that in terms of the number of arrests made by race, Black are among the highest, have the most number of arrests made within that 14-year gap, compared to Black and Hispanic, that's much lower. And in these two visuals, you can see crimes committed in terms of historic data and year-to-date data. But in both, they have the same day, Wednesday, which happens to be the day with the highest crimes committed during the weekday. And this graph shows that in comparison to two holidays, New Year's Day and Independence Day, you see that on New Year's Day, there's more crimes committed than on February 8th and March 26th. But for Independence Day, in comparison to May 12th and August 31st, there were more crimes committed on May 12th, which happened to be a Wednesday.
The next question we wanted to ask if age was a determinant of crime, and we recognize that age is a very robust predictor of crime, both in terms of the aggregate and for individuals as well. The most common finding from our analysis shows that crime tends to be a relatively younger person's activity. However, the age-crime relationship is not invariant, which also means that it's slightly distributed. And in fact, it varies with respect to very specific features according to crime types. As we can see from this trend line graph, the charts show that the age crime data is very concentrated in the 25 to 44 age group. And on the other hand, the age crime relationship seems to be fairly similar for males and females. Lastly, the 65%, the 65 plus age group constitutes of a very small trend in this chart, and that is because relatively little is known about older offenders. Lastly, we wanted to look at the role of sex in the different types of crimes that are committed. And we found that men are much more likely to commit crimes than women, although female crime has been rising faster than male crime since the late 20th century. Men and women also appear to commit different types of crimes, as we can see in this chart. And an example of that would be if you look at the top most committed crime, which is assaults and related crimes, is that almost 80% of these crimes are committed by men and only 20% are constituted by women.
Thank you very much.